maintenance technician on a nuclear submarine. I did that for quite some time. And then I went to college and I became an architect. But I fell in love with technology relating to building operations. And I've worked since then for companies like Autodesk, FM Systems, Johnson Controls. And I really love this topic. I love seeing it grow in importance and capabilities. It's really exciting for me to be able to share some of that with you today. Robbie?
Hi, everybody. Robbie Davis. I'm a senior product manager for Johnson Controls. I've been with the company for 10 years. 7 years ago, I joined our digital solutions teams, and I've been part of a journey myself. You know, I started with some of the solutions. We aggregated a lot of solutions worldwide into a centralized team. So I've seen our products grow from 100 buildings to almost 4,000 buildings today. So what I'm excited to share with you today is some of our best practices and what we've learned along that journey.
Yeah, and I do these presentations quite a bit. One of the first things I do, I don't know if you guys do this, I walk into a room and I start looking up and I start looking around to see how smart the space is that I'm in. And I can tell you this space is not very smart. I'm not putting down the Baltimore Convention Center. It's a great place to do a trade show. But there's really a lot of opportunity for us to make even the oldest buildings smarter. You know, if you turn the clock back 10 years ago, we talked about smart buildings in its nascent time. We were really talking about base building design and construction. You were making buildings smart as you built them. Now there's so many technologies available that we can make any building smarter. I've got clients in the UK that have buildings that are several hundred years old, and they make them smarter by putting in lightweight IoT-based technologies to do things like space and occupancy planning, indoor air quality connecting to the building control system. All of that stuff is capable, and we're going to talk to you guys today about how you can do that pretty easily and really cost effectively. Where's that little clicker at? There we go. So some of our learning objectives today, we'll talk about how to create and implement a successful smart building strategy through sort of a process of thinking about it, a high-level process that I think you guys will get a lot of value out of. We'll explore how data and analytics can provide deeper facility insights. When you start to connect these things, they start to stream data. They start to give you answers, and if you're not listening, you miss a big opportunity to be able to do things. They never go to sleep, most of these technologies. They're not like us, they don't take vacations, they're on 24/7, and they're constantly giving us answers, but we just have to be listening. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll discover the progression towards autonomous building control. Really, this is what we're all, in our industry, Johnson Controls and our competitors, this is what we talk about every single day, making buildings operate themselves more effectively, more efficiently, helping you guys out, because for the most part, when I talk to clients, I'm not hearing that the cavalry's on the way. We're not having a lot of people saying, oh, wow, we're just hiring a ton of new facility managers to help us get our jobs done. So our jobs aren't getting easier, and we can start leaning on this kind of technology to help us kind of scale ourselves. And then we'll give you some tips to improving your building's performance. Robbie's going to talk a lot about actual use cases where we've implemented a lot of this technology and give you sort of some of the answers and feedback that we're hearing from the market. So let's just sort of level set so that we understand why we're talking about this today. There's a lot of reasons to make your building smarter. One of the big ones, and I think one of the low-hanging fruit, Robbie, honestly, I see this one every single day, is saving money, reducing things like your carbon footprint, but ultimately, while you're doing that, you're reducing energy costs, you're reducing the need for kind of consuming a lot of resources. And so making buildings smarter, making them operate themselves, turn them off when people aren't using them. This is one of the most obvious answers, right? All through the pandemic, that thing that we don't like to talk about anymore, most buildings were up and running constantly, consuming a lot of power, and it was completely unnecessary. So we're gonna show you how you can kind of turn those off and on real time to sort of maximize your savings. A lack of resources and skills. So, I was saying this earlier, the cavalry's not on the way. The other thing that we're seeing, I work with IFMA a lot and do a lot of thought leadership. We're seeing the aging out of our industry. We've got a lot of people within our industry who have 25, 35 years experience all up in their head. And when they walk out the door and they go retire and they go fishing somewhere or go on a cruise, they're taking all of that valuable information with them. And so we're working really hard on having the technology remember all of the things that they knew so we could carry that forward. And that's really an important part of our future. We've obviously had, especially in this geographic area, a lot of return to office. If you've not been on the DC Beltway recently, you realize it's probably the worst traffic you've ever seen in your life. Everyone's back. We're really focusing on buildings being used a lot harder than they have been in the last half dozen years. And when buildings get used really hard, they start to get, they start to break down, equipment gets worn out. We're seeing increased maintenance costs. We've got to get that under control, and so this technology has a big play in that as well. We've also got a lot of dated buildings and equipment out there. As our portfolios of buildings get older, we have an opportunity to really lengthen the life, the useful life of those buildings, increase the life of our assets. We're seeing a tremendous amount of focus on things like enterprise asset management, just better asset management, better maintenance management. Right now, we're seeing a huge focus on that. Robbie?
Great. So I wanted to talk about an introduction here to kind of the evolution of smart buildings. So what we generally see is our customers are bringing us kind of a mixed bag of technology, team experience. So when we look at this and we're approaching any new customers, we want to kind of understand where these customers sit on that journey. So starting with legacy buildings, generally these are going to be buildings that just have thermostats in place. There's generally standalone systems. You're not going to have a lot of smarts in here and kind of understand what's happening within the facilities, every single hour, even day.
And that's probably 99.9% of the building stock in the world honestly sits in that legacy building category.
And I was surprised, actually. I thought we actually sat between about connected buildings and smart buildings, but when we actually looked across kind of the marketplace, you're right, Brian, we're generally at the legacy building standpoint. So usually where we're working is the connected buildings. So this is where we're going to have, there's a control system in place. We generally can see the overall energy usage for the building. So you're starting to be able to make some decisions on what's happening within your facilities and getting a little bit smarter here. But where we're going, and this is, again, we're not here yet, but from a smart building standpoint, this is where we're starting to connect a lot of those systems, where we can get some of that interoperability. We can see the energy usage of the facility. We can see, is your space occupied? We have control sequences to start the buildings at the right time. And a big aspect or evolution here that we've had is the explosion of cloud computing and IoT devices, where we can actually now have these systems talk to each other. But to get there, there are a lot of steps to enable that. Then where we want to go is obviously autonomous buildings. How do we get to the autonomous building level where after we've organized all of that data, that we can help some of these systems make more decisions on our behalf? But it's a journey, right? We're not there yet. So to get started, it's all about the data. Data is at the heart of this transformation. So I love to show this slide because what it represents is really kind of a structure to get that data out of your facilities. So if you can't see on the left here, we've got a slide here that basically shows on the bottom left, or let's say the bottom row, these are all of your IoT devices, your control systems, your meters. And they're all generating data, raw information that basically shows, a heartbeat of your facilities. Now, to get access to that data, generally what you're going to have, and any good vendor or any vendors out there will be able to deploy a gateway that can interpret these languages locally. So it'll be BACnet, Modbus, LAN, OPC, MQTT for new IoT devices. And what it's doing is that gateway is going to organize your building management systems and that equipment information to pull it into a central location. And you want to do that in a safe manner, a secure manner. So generally you're looking to send that data over a single port. Usually it's port 443, an encrypted line. So you take that raw data and you're sending it up to a central location. Now on the right side, you also want communication to, I'm sure a lot of you may have adopted kind of single purpose applications where you're looking at occupancy states within a space, but it's generally not going to be pulling in lots of different information. So, but in that case, you don't need a gateway. You want to be able to pull that data via an API where that data is already structured. So any smart platform, what you're going to need is kind of a way to connect that data in. So pull it from your local systems or those locally adopted or those kind of siloed environments via API, which is an application programming interface.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting about this is that something I was saying earlier, you probably already have systems and things, capabilities in your building that's giving you data and answers. But if you're not listening to it, if you're not bringing it together in a way that's useful, it's just information flying through the air and we're not really doing anything about it. So we're seeing a really large push towards, this is really the foundation for making buildings smarter, is taking that data and presenting it in ways that's easily consumable by humans. Frankly, we're not very good at receiving large amounts of information. When I say large amounts of information, I'm talking about millions and millions and maybe even billions of little bits of information flying out of these systems on a continual basis. It's not like, you know, you're getting an alert every hour. We're talking about massive amounts of information that's potentially available. One of the ones I see, Robbie, all the time is that people, they just think the Wi-Fi is just for, you know, getting on the internet. Well, a lot of organizations are looking at Wi-Fi for doing things like triangulating where someone is, counting the number of devices that are in a building. Devices equal people. You can do things like emergency exit planning by saying, if there's a ton of Wi-Fi devices on the network, there may be people still in the building. There's all of these kinds of use cases where you can start thinking about how your building can help you get better at what you do. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's great example. So, in starting here, so think about this as kind of what I've heard an example of is kind of a layered cake. This is the first layer of your cake, and that's the data, figuring out how to extract that information from your facilities. The next layer here is that when we're bringing that into a central location, well, what we want to make sure that we're doing is, or any vendors that you're working with, is that they have a plan to structure that data. And you may hear things like, you know, haystack and brick and data models. So it's not just about pulling the data from these local systems and understanding that this is a return air temperature point or this is the damper position at any given moment. It's the relationship of those systems. So you want to know, you know, this air handler is serving these floors, and these downstream of that air handler, you have these fan power boxes that are connected. And that's all information that's important to help these systems make better decisions and uncover what's happening with that raw data. Now, in addition to the structuring of the data that's coming in, you want to be able to communicate across these different systems back and forth. So if I see that a space is unoccupied, you know, I can make a decision to put that HVAC or that cooling in setback modes, but you have to be able to do that effectively. So it's one about the relationship and the structuring of the data to find those insights, but then carry out those decisions for interoperability. So going forward then, so if I come back for a second, we've got the data layer at the bottom, we've got the structuring and kind of what is referred to generally as the independent data layer, and then we have the applications. So this is where you want to build on top of that independent data layer, your applications. And what I wanted to lead with is more, my focus is more on energy and sustainability. So I think this is a really good example of some applications and the structuring of that technology stack released by Berkeley Labs a couple of years ago, I think 2020. And the example here, what you can see is it's a journey, right? So starting at the top here, if you look at the left, we've got all of the devices and those data sources that we're pulling in. They're coming into that independent data layer, and then your applications on the right side. So at the very top, you know, as you're starting this journey, you may be looking at just gathering utility bills. So you can understand, you know, what's the makeup of your portfolio if you have multiple buildings, or just looking at your single building to say, okay, generally, what is my energy usage over time? As you identify key buildings that are consuming more, you stage up. You go to them, you start to deploy sub-meters or meters on the site. And then you can get an idea of, okay, where is that consumption being used within your facilities? Is it these floors? Is it these assets? From there, we've got applications for analytics, so fault detection diagnostics. So if you know what assets are not performing correctly or spaces that are using excess consumption, you want to start to analyze that. And you have analytics that generally fault detection diagnostics is very common, but you want to do this in a standard manner where you can look for the inefficiencies that are occurring in those assets, so you know potentially why it's happening beyond just alarms where it's in a bad state or it's not performing correctly. You want to understand why it's not performing and have some root cause analysis. And then finally, this is more, it gets more advanced where you've got the automated system optimization. So this is where if you understand the inefficiencies that are happening with those systems that you're giving that control system or this optimization solution for smart buildings the opportunity or privilege to control those assets for you. And you can do that in multiple stages. Generally, you want to look for one that has kind of like an autopilot where it says, okay, we'll do it by ourselves, or it goes into the ability to kind of give you recommendations, say, do you want to go into these modes or give control back to these systems? But the thing to take away here is that you're staging, right? You don't have to jump immediately to that bottom layer here for the automated system optimization. You can kind of stage into that depending on where you are on that journey. So then AI, at the heart, it's at the top of news headlines everywhere. The way we like to refer to it, or I like to think about it, is the definition here from the dictionary. It's the capability of machines to imitate intelligent human behavior, right? So it's really kind of like what I was describing on that automated system. But the technology has been around for a while. It's just kind of blowing up recently because of the new breakthroughs with the Gen AI capabilities. But when I think about it here, you can see that there is subparts to artificial intelligence. Looking at AI, if you step down, you may hear things like machine learning, deep learning, Gen AI, and then agentic AI. So as you look at AI and we have this data that's structured, we have the relationship of that information, so all that raw data that we're now scanning, as we apply AI as another capability on top of that, what we can do is you can train the models to now look at the information and find those inefficiencies or give recommendations for automation. But there's multiple different applications here. So when we think about, like, let's say, machine learning, this is generally like a quantitative model. You're looking for predictions. You're looking for trends that are happening. After you have something like a prediction, you apply like a deep learning model where you can essentially train that prediction over time. So you say, okay, I've predicted, let's say, energy usage as an example. And with that prediction, am I getting better over time? Am I accurate with that forecast? And what that point says is that if I'm falling out of sync with that forecast, I can essentially push that back to the model to retrain it. So that's where you have like deep learning. It's like a neural net where it makes a decision. If it was good, then it continues to make those kind of decisions. If it's bad, it then stops and changes the decision pathway. And then with Gen AI and the launch here, what you'll have is basically the analysis of that says, in natural language, it'll say, this is on track, or this forecast is, this is what we think is happening within the facilities. So let's go ahead and let's start our journey here.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit to that AI, because every session you go to now, AI is
Yes.
part of the session. We hear that all the time, and people are trying to figure out what it is. The way I think about it, I'm a pretty simple person, right? I'm not a building engineer or anything like that. I'm an architect, so if you've ever worked with architects, you know we're pretty simple people. So I think of it as this. When you look at a lot of software solutions, you see these really powerful dashboards that have bar charts and graphs and all these trend lines, things overlaid on top of one another. AI, especially Gen AI, can simply tell you what you're looking at. And you can ask in a really simple way, the way humans are. What is this chart telling me? And it will give you a narrative about what you're looking at. Beyond that, you can start to ask questions. So maybe I'll get an answer about what this chart is, but then I can start to drill in and I can say things, really complicated things that would have required you to do a lot of data analysis in the past, such as which of my buildings have the lowest utilization and the highest energy costs with the highest maintenance costs in my portfolio. And you could just continue on asking and iterating that question, and you're going to get answers. These are the kinds of answers that would have taken us weeks, if not months, to get, especially in the distant past, and maybe even longer than that. And that's really, to me, AI, getting answers from this data in ways that humans can simply ask and get. And so I think that, to me, is the biggest value. It's what I'm seeing happening really, really quickly, and I think that's why we're talking about it so much these days. All right, so let's talk about the smart building journey. For those of you who would like to start to think about implementing a smart building, maybe program within your facilities, and the two of us have an opportunity to talk to a lot of clients. We're seeing new Job titles like smart building strategy coming into the profession, smart building leader, smart building director of smart building strategy. I've seen this at pharmaceuticals, I've seen it in healthcare, I've seen it in manufacturing. It's something that is emerging right now. So if you want to jump on the bandwagon of something new, this is something you might want to look at. And I think it's absolutely very cool stuff. So the first thing is understanding what you want to achieve if you're going to start pursuing making your building smarter. And I'll break that down a little bit. We can start things, there may be a lot of reasons why we're doing this. The CEO of your organization may come out and say, we're going to become a sustainable organization, or we're going to reduce energy costs. Facilities team, how are you going to contribute, right? So you may get that challenge. The second one is we may be upgrading buildings or portfolio capabilities. This is something that we saw a lot of organizations do during the last 5 years as work patterns changed drastically. You know, we had a lot of hybrid working. This year, interesting data point, and we monitor several million square feet of real estate with sensors. We've been doing this since 2019, the same real estate, and watching utilization levels change. In 2025, for the first time, there are going to be more people in the office than working hybrid. In the last 6 years, that's true. Everyone talked about hybrid. We're starting to hear that less. Now we're talking about people being back. So this year, those two things are going to cross. The other thing that's happening is that the number of remote workers has dropped to less than 10%. And we believe that's going to continue a downward trend. And it's a little bit like going back to the past in a lot of ways. However, people are using facilities differently. They're coming in, but they're using it differently. And so we want to do things like understand how they're using the building so we can upgrade our building capabilities. Maybe we're changing our space. Maybe we're upgrading the system so that that employees have better control of their indoor air quality, access to light, all that stuff. Making building equipment last longer, I can tell you guys right now, I hear this every single time we get on with either a prospect or a customer. It's not about, oh, we're building, you know, we're in an arms race with another university and we're building 1 billion square feet of new space. That's not what we're hearing. We're hearing people say, we've been challenged to make our buildings last longer, make our buildings more efficient. So we're getting that as a big motivator to move towards a smart building strategy. Improving employee well-being and productivity. We're hearing this quite a bit as well. We hear this in the realm of what's called workplace experience, allowing your employees to have better access to better indoor air quality, access to light, understanding where they're going to sit today. Is it loud? Is it noisy? Is there sunlight? All of these things. Where's the closest amenities? How long's the line in the cafeteria? All of these things, through technology, you can actually start to provide. So if you're being challenged there with improving employee experience, patient experience, that's another big one, student experience, anybody who's coming into the facility, we're hearing this a lot. So delivering an inviting workplace experience when people, if you're telling them they need to come back or they're required to come back because of return to office, wouldn't it be great if they were happy coming back because your buildings were so wonderful that they wanted to be there? And then identifying and addressing energy waste. This is Robbie's very unique area of expertise. If you've got questions there, this is the guy you're going to want to talk to this week. All right, so the second step of your smart building journey is identify secondary and tertiary drivers for adoption. And you're asking yourself, what the heck does that mean? And I'm going to tell you what that means here, just like I did in the last slide. We're talking about things like improving inefficiencies. There's a lot of things that we can do here. One is turn the lights out when no one's there. Bring the building control system down when no one's there. Turn the elevators off when people aren't going to certain floors. There's all kinds of things that you can do that give you the benefits of smart buildings and reducing inefficiencies. If you've got extremely low utilization on Fridays, why is your entire building on? You know, those kinds of things, having an understanding that you can drive behaviors to increase efficiency. Reducing waste, those two go hand in hand. Duplicated effort, this is something that we see all the time. Doing things like reducing cycle time. So you've got a maintenance technician going out to a facility, maybe it's a facility that they're not located in, and they go 3 times in 1 week to solve a problem they could have solved 1 time because access to information to helping them reduce duplicating effort, and that's reducing cycle time. Long hours, I work a lot of long hours. I'm sure all of you work a lot of long hours, and wouldn't it be great if you had better work-life balance? and you could go home at the end of the day knowing that your buildings were in good shape and they were taking better care of themselves. This is a big motivator. Confusing and inconvenient scheduling. I love this one because I really think that, we have returned to the office, but people are using the office in really chaotic ways. Has anybody heard of coffee badging? Coffee badging is one of my new favorite terms. Coffee badging is when you have a return to office mandate and you have to be in 5 days a week, but the only thing they're doing is checking badge swipes. So what do people come? They come in the morning, they swipe in, they grab a cup of coffee, and they go home. We're seeing that quite a bit. It's called coffee badging. So we've got people using facilities in really interesting and confusing ways. It used to be if you wanted to know where everyone was or how well your floor was being used, as a facility manager, you walked on the floor and you looked across the sea of cubicles and you could tell exactly. I had a facility manager once tell me, I asked her how she finds people, and she rolled her seat outside of her office, and she said, "Bob," and she could hear way down. He's like, "What?" She goes, "That's how I know that he's here today." And so that's the way that people used to do things, because they sat in the same place every day. You knew that they were going to be there, and we're not using our facilities that way anymore. So we need technology. If you truly want to understand this, there's a lot of ways. And if you go down to the trade show floor and you see there's going to be a lot of vendors down there who can solve this problem. It's fascinating. Difficulty in accessing information to do your job. This is what Robbie was talking about earlier, crossing the digital divide, taking sort of facility engineering kind of data and bringing that out from like the basement or out from behind some giant screen and putting it into the hands real time of people who can use that information. So I just simply want to know what the temperature in this room is. Why do I have to go to a building engineer to ask them that? I should be able to access the information. Is someone sitting at this desk before I walk all the way to the 5th floor? Because I like sitting there. I should be able to find out that information. And then inadequate communication, those two go hand in hand. Check my time here. All right, we're in good shape. All right, formalize a clear vision for what success looks like. I really believe that this is incredibly important. You need to ask yourself what the use cases are you're trying to solve if you're going to start upgrading your buildings, improving your buildings to make them smarter. Why are we doing it, and what are we expecting? The worst thing to do is pick technology and install it. Could be expensive, could be you don't really know what you're looking for, so you kind of do it all. And then you start getting data from it, and it's not answering the questions that you forgot to ask, right? So that's really important to understand what you're trying to achieve. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to give it kind of a use case.
Let's do it. So one of my first clients that we had set up on kind of this journey, they had approached us. They had a connected building. They had 2 different building management systems running their major airport. It's one of the busiest in the world. And one of the challenges that they had was they were battling just discomfort from passengers. They were constantly getting complaints. It's too humid, it's too hot, cold. In addition to that, what they had was they had executives from the airlines that they have a hub at. Executives would fly in, and they'd say, they'd deboard, and they'd be walking through the terminal, and they're like, this experience is terrible for our clients, our passengers, right? So they would have a direct line to the CEO of the airline, and they'd say, something's not working, and they would kick off a whole fire drill, right? They'd have to then jump into the building management system, they'd scan all the points, they'd trend something, they'd try to figure out, in whichever BMS this was, of course, they'd jump in and say, okay, is this box serving this area? We just opened up this, this deboarding ramp here, so we've got hot air that's coming in, it's hard to manage. So, it was just a debacle, right? There's too much information to be managing in the single building management system. So what we did was we stepped back and we made sure that we had the right stakeholders involved. We had the maintenance teams, we had our facility management teams, also the energy consultants and staff. So when we scanned all of the data, what we wanted to make sure that we were doing was dissect how they were managing this today. Everything was reactionary. They were waiting for that call to happen. So the way that they were trying to get in front of this was that they trended all this data in the building management system, and they had a team that would work about 5 to 10 hours a week just building a defect list that would help manage these hot and cold calls. So they would scan, there's thousands of boxes and zone temperatures that they're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? So what we ended up doing was we created virtual points. So as we pulled all the data together and we just focused on couple terminals to kind of prove out the use case. We started rolling out the zone temperatures into single corridors or single zones so we could look at patterns over time. And then from there, we applied analytics that said, okay, we're going to have a couple rules that help us understand when we're drifting into certain zones. Then from there, we were able to automate that manual process. So with a couple of rules that we're running every day, we were able to take that maintenance team away from sitting in front of the BMS, downloading the data, working in Excel, which is not their specialty, right? And we were able to automate that whole process and find 95% of that defect list every single hour, right? In addition to that, we were able to discover almost 20% additional items that they weren't even aware of. So once we had this deployed, we were able to get in front of these hot and cold calls and then also start to target some of these or implement some data-driven maintenance strategies. So instead of waiting for alerts and alarms that were just too unruly to manage, we were able to get in front of them and say, we have issues, these valves are stuck open, these dampers aren't working, and really put a maintenance schedule in place that helped get in front of this passenger discomfort and then save a lot of the maintenance team's time. So a couple takeaways, lessons here. Clear goal. We didn't approach the airport and say, we're going to connect every single system. We're going to pull in both building management systems. We're going to give you everything that we think you can take advantage of. We're going to say, we're going to solve a real business problem that you have, and we're going to make you look good doing it. At the same time, we identified the appropriate champions. Like, who are the end users that need this data? We're not just going to deploy the raw data for them to guess on what to do next. We want to make sure that we have the right people in place to then carry out these actions. And finally, again, staging this. It's important not to take a shotgun approach. We had a proof point that we wanted to carry out here, and then from this pilot we started with the 2 terminals and then we scaled to the other building management system, and today we cover the whole airport.
I love the way you make Atlanta look so simple.
Yeah.
You've been in Terminal E and have to get to T or baggage claim and the train's not working.
Yeah.
You're going to get your step count in that day. I can tell you it's like 10 miles it feels like when you're walking and dragging a bag. Anyway, let's go on. So the next step in your smart building journey is don't go it alone. I like this one because it's really about building a team to help you go on this journey. One of the best use cases, or actually probably depends on what side of the aisle you're sitting on, is a facility manager that buys a device and doesn't tell anybody that they bought that device, and then they stick that device on something and put it on the network. You're probably going to get an unfriendly visit from your IT and security organization very quickly, when it would have been quite simple to ask, how do I put this on the network? So it's really about building the team and asking questions and getting help. So one of the questions I always like to ask is like, what level of scalability do I need? If I'm picking a technology or some kind of solution, is it designed for a small building when I've got 10 million square feet and I'm surprised when it doesn't scale to handle that. You really need to understand that. Is the system proprietary or open, based on open standards? And what I mean by that is it kind of a standalone system that's difficult to integrate with, or is it open and accessible so that we can add? And that goes really hand in hand incredibly well with scalability. How are these systems secured? That goes back to what I was saying earlier. Please don't stick stuff on your network or have your building control system unsecured. We've got a lot of technology. You hear about this all the time. Probably some of the biggest hacks in history have been through building systems because they're often installed without an understanding that they need to be secured. So it's really, really important because it's kind of like having a computer on your network that the password's password, right? That's not a good idea. And we continually see that as a challenge. What kind of customer support does it provide? So like I said, are you going to be going alone? Do you have internal stakeholders like IT who can help answer questions? Do you have a vendor that you can pick up the phone and call at any point? Do you have regional or local offices to get support if you've got something like a building control system? This is important. What kind of training does the provider provide? Really, obviously, if you want to get really good at it, get trained on it. Do they have conferences? Do they have online training? Do they have certifications? Do they participate in conferences like NFMT, which a lot of vendors do and provide training courses here? How difficult will it be to upgrade and maintain these systems over time? Is it going to be outdated, a year after you install it and go through that implementation process? You sort of want to pick something that's obviously solid, but something that's also scalable and will get you to the future. What are the financial condition and outlook for the potential partner? So I've seen this a lot, especially when you see something that's very super cool new technology, and it seems like Bob and Jim, who are working out of their basement, are the only people on the planet who have that technology, and you go with them, and then Bob gets hired by Johnson Controls, and Bob's like, sorry, I'm not going to work on that anymore. You kind of want to avoid that, unless, I kind of think that that's kind of cool, but you probably want to avoid it when you want to take good care of your career and pick technologies that you're going to have these potential partners that are going to be here today, tomorrow, next year, 10 years from now. What existing solutions do you have in place that might guide decision-making? Audit what you have. Robbie was talking about Atlanta having a couple of different building control systems. I spoke to someone not so long ago that said Tokyo Narita Airport has like 10 different building control systems, something really crazy like that. Understanding what you have before you pick a solution to solve one problem, I think, is really important. So audit your technology, ask questions, don't go it alone. There's a lot of people within your organizations, there's a lot of use cases. Robbie's going to give you another one right now, which could help you answer those questions.
So on that building journey, this is another great example, University of Rhode Island. So this customer was going from that connected building to more of that smart building application. Now what they had already done was they already identified a vendor that was going to start to pull together a lot of that information. And they were running analytics, and they were helping to get in front of some of these inefficiencies or areas of improvement they wanted to make. The problem that they were facing was that it was complex. There were usability issues with the platform that they had chosen. They had a very strong team that basically maintained and deployed the control system themselves, but the analytics platform that they were using was very hard to program. They needed to learn a new coding language to maintain it. So if they wanted to change certain rules, they had to jump into this coding language to make those adjustments, or they needed to rely on the vendor themselves. So what they really needed was a configurable open solution to allow them to deploy across their campus. The other aspect in analyzing this solution was that their outlook. They have 250 buildings across their campus, and some of those buildings are 260 years old when they first came about. So that system, what they really needed to do was to be able to scale here. So what we introduced was basically a user-friendly environment for them to pull in that information and configure a lot of the aspects and themselves. So they could go and they could map points, they could set up new rules, they could then turn over buildings themselves. And one of the things that we discovered for them was that this was a tool, once we deployed it, that they could use as their core building commissioning. So every time that they launched or retrofitted a new building, they could pull that data into the single environment that they could either apply new rules or they could apply the global rules that they've applied to the system. So giving them not a white glove service, but really a configurable solution that fit with their team's expertise. So some lessons learned here, again, so choosing the right solution. And it wasn't about the most advanced solution with AI and all these capabilities. It was just the right solution that met their customers', again, expertise and what their team needed. The next is knowing your buildings. They had a lot of older facilities, but they weren't approaching each one of them as kind of in the same manner. They needed to upgrade some controllers or swap out some equipment here. So they put some budget aside in order to get these systems integrated into the system. Now, in addition to that, again, I'll highlight that piloting is critical. You don't want to deploy across the whole campus, right? You want to kind of approach this with those targeted outcomes and then grow from there once you prove out those use cases. And a critical component of that is to be able to have those quick wins. So when you deploy, one of the things that we did, we deployed the software on a new building, and what we found was that every terminal box was incorrectly programmed. The contractor had already closed out the job, and when we ran it on the analytics platform, we saw that every single box needed to be reprogrammed. So before it got turned over and the vendor and the contractor walked away, we were able to flag that and get the project corrected before that building was turned over for day one or day two.
Great. All right, so the next one is preparing for deployment. First step in your journey, next step in your journey is, are there infrastructure challenges in your deployment? So if you're deploying something that's going to have Wi-Fi associated with it, are you going to have connectivity challenges? One of the ones that I've seen recently is an assumption around low voltage cabling, believe it or not, PoE cabling. Some organizations believe that you could just pull your own PoE cables, but it really comes down to the state, local and municipal rules around things like that. Some states, some municipalities require an electrician to pull low voltage cabling, some do not. So it's all about understanding what are the challenges going to be, what are the capabilities that are going to be available to you as you deploy the solution. You really need to look at all of it, power, connectivity. Am I going to be able to get access to the building? Is someone who's in charge of that building going to say, I'm sorry, but employees work in here all day long. You can't be pulling cabling. You've got to do it on weekends. There's all of these challenges that you really need to truly understand before you do it. Have you included your IT colleagues in your plan? I've beaten that one to death. Make sure that they understand that you're going to be deploying a technology solution inside of their infrastructure and their network. There are some technologies like cellular that can help you kind of get around that a little bit, but always include them as part of those decision making because they're going to be your friends and they're going to check off that you're allowed to do this. Are there institutional policies, especially HR policies in place that need to be considered? If you're going to do something such as deploy occupancy scanner, occupancy counters, the kinds of counters, what are called flow counters that are over your doors that allow you to know the number of people going in and out. Even if you're doing things such as deploying badge swiping, you really need to understand and communicate well with your HR to understand what the policies are. One of the things that we've seen, it's more in the distant past now, we're not seeing this. My son's 28, his idea of privacy is very different from mine because I'm in a different generation. He just assumes that he's not anonymous. I mean, he's kind of been online since he was born, and his whole approach to it, if he walks by like a camera or a sensor, he's just kind of walks by it. Now I'm like, is it doing facial recognition? Does it know who I am? Does it understand why I'm here? Why is it counting me? Communicating that and understanding what your HR policies are, because I've seen employees, reach under their desk and find this thing and pop it off, especially if you're if you've got a lot of software developers or engineers, and unscrew it and take a look on the inside of it because they're trying to figure out what it is. And next thing you know, you're not really counting that desk anymore because you forgot to tell them that it's just there to let us know if someone's sitting there or not. So really communicating those policies as you implement this technology, I think is absolutely key and incredibly important. The next one is all aboard, right? We're deploying the technology, it's out there, what's next? So some of the benefits of smart buildings is really communicating, I believe, to all of the stakeholders, and the stakeholders could be the facilities team, could be real estate, could be the occupants, could be your employees, could be contractors, letting them know what's happening and why you're doing it. Listen, we're deploying this system because we want to better understand how the building's being used. We want to save energy. We're not deploying it to see if Bob's at his desk every day and is productive. That's not why we're doing it. We're trying to save money, make our buildings more efficient. Just say it. Say what your goal is, why you're deploying the technology. How will the change will benefit them? Well, every day you come in, we're not doing assigned seating anymore. You're not actually sure where you're going to be sitting. We'll make suggestions to you. We'll let you know where we think you should be sitting. Where is there space that's got access to light? We're including things like indoor air quality. Is it loud? Maybe I want it to be loud. Maybe I want some energy today because I've been sitting at my desk for the last 3 days and it's been quiet. Maybe I want to get a little bit of energy. So understanding that is really, really important, and helping them understand that when you deploy these systems, you're going to give them greater capabilities to improve their workplace experience. How and when the change is being implemented, so what the timeline for that is, maybe one building's coming online and then another building, especially if you're in a campus situation. How the change will disrupt their normal workflow, I was talking earlier. Some of this installation may require someone coming to their desk during the day, and they're just going to have to work with that person. We do this all the time. We deploy sensors. We have trucks that roll constantly, and we communicate to those facilities when we expect to be there so they can communicate to their employees so that we're not disrupting their work. So those things I think are really important as part of this journey. And then the last thing is let the journey begin. So going back to the very beginning, understanding why you did it, what your goals are, what the use cases are that you're trying to solve. Do you have the data available to help you understand that were you successful or were you not? Did you build in flexibility so you could iterate if things need to be tweaked a little bit? Can we add more data over time? Can we expand this to other floors, other buildings? Really thinking about that journey, and as you begin, when you first turn it on, are we getting the value that we planned for and were promised? I think that's really important. Always check. Always make sure you're hitting your goals and make sure that that investment is exactly what you were looking for. So Robbie's going to go through another use case.
Okay, last use case here. So this is, as far as kind of the customer journey here, this sits as really that smart building space. Brand new building in Hudson Yards, so headquarter location in New York City. And you can see some of their objectives. They want to make sure that they have the best people experience, a healthy space, and then meeting all the carbon reduction goals and energy efficiencies that they can. Now, what you would expect is that they have everything, right? They have the most efficient space, the most efficient building that you can deploy. They've got all the technology. What they had was, as Brian's been describing, IoT sensors and occupancy counters. They knew where everybody could sit at every single, or where they were sitting, what spaces were occupied. We have sub-metering in every single space, every floor, and with that information, what we found was that there were still opportunities. As we pulled the data together and we started running models and analytics, and in this case, some AI capabilities, what we found was there were still opportunities for savings. So on the very bottom there, you can see there's little charts here, and what they highlight are some insights. We saw that the building was starting up too early. Occupants weren't arriving for another hour and a half, and the building was just running, it was like 7 o'clock in the morning. Or it's actually early. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. We were running at, getting all the rooms down to the appropriate temperatures, but nobody was there. So a huge opportunity to save energy in this large building. Another one we had was we combined the energy data and the occupancy information. We trended out and saw the energy per capita. So we could see how much energy was being used per person. We're trending that out. It's even. All of a sudden we get a huge spike. So we're either using a ton of energy or nobody's in the space. Turns out nobody was in the space because that day was a new recognized holiday from the corporation. It was Juneteenth that they were recognizing. Building's still running as if everybody's there, but nobody's in the space. So what we found, the building management system didn't have setbacks or the exception schedules that were deployed. Again, brand new building, you expect all of this to be there, but the analytics and the solutions that bringing that data together is able to uncover that. The last one I'll point out is meters can be expensive. So what we did was we looked at every single fan power box within a space. We created virtual profiles for those meters to calculate their electrical and thermal loads. So now we can see every energy profile for these boxes in the conference rooms, every space. So when we plot them against each other, we look in some peer analysis, we see common trend, and all of a sudden we see a handful of boxes that are way up here, right? So we've got a couple that are using 4 times the amount of energy that they're supposed to. What we found was that some of these boxes were posted on outside walls. So we had outside air coming in during the winter and driving up that saying that it's too cold in the space. So the boxes are running 100% load. So the fix for that was costing us thousands of dollars in this new building, it's $5 spray foam can. We filled up the gap, and then for $5 we're saving thousands of dollars every year. So again, lessons learned here, we want to make sure we've got the right solutions. I'll point out for this one, when you're analyzing some of the vendors for your site, make sure that you're doing your due diligence. Some of the IoT sensors that they deployed, the vendor that they chose launched during like COVID, and they were a fast startup, and then they ended up going out of business. So picking the right solutions to make up kind of that ecosystem, make sure that you're doing your due diligence here, and then identifying the appropriate users. So all of these insights, it was working hand in hand with the energy teams, the facility teams. So when we went to go inspect that space, the person that found that thermostat was in the right location, we've got our engineers that are checking that out. So the data is one thing, but to carry out those solutions, you need those teams and the right users engaged.
I think we're just about at time,
yeah.
Right? So just a couple of slides here real quick. This is kind of an overview. the best practices for your smart building journey. I won't go through these too much because we've already done it. You want to just take a quick shot. We are going to be providing this entire deck for everyone who's at the conference to download, so you'll be able to get all of that. And so let's just go ahead and end there. I think it's perfect. It's really just a wrap up. So if you've got questions, we're kind of at the end of time. We can certainly answer those, or you can track us down. Robbie and I are going to be here for the next couple of days. Johnson Controls has got a booth. You can find us. So just let us know. And we hope that you appreciated the show, and we really appreciated your time.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.